Hello and welcome to this presentation where we'll be discussing the 350,000 surviving census and census substitute records which remain for County Cavan. And we'll be discussing how the records came to survive, how they came to be discovered, and some more information about how they can be searched on the Cavan Townlands website. First of all, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Michael McShane, and along with my wife, Catherine Kerr, we host CavanTownlands.com, which is a website dedicated to the recording of the history of Cavan's 2,000 townlands and their inhabitants. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Brendan Scott and everybody at Breffni Historical Society and Cavan Library for giving us this opportunity to present our findings to you here. The presentation is split into three parts. Part one, we will be looking at the lost records and the background as to how they survived and how they came to be on the website. Part two, we'll be going through the breakdown of those individual records and how they can be searched on the website. And in part three, Catherine will be giving a live demonstration of the search facility and talking you through how best to go about looking for those elusive records. So part one, and I suppose given the year that's in it, we'll be looking at one particularly tragic event in the history of the loss of many Irish historical and genealogical records, which came about due to the occupation and the bombardment of the forecourts in June of 1922. So the centenary will be happening very shortly. I think many people, including myself, we are familiar with the bare bones of this story. It does get brought up a lot in genealogical circles, but I personally didn't have a great understanding as to exactly what happened leading up to the events and what happened on the ground. So I'm just going to give you sort of a brief overview as to the location and the background of the building itself. In the aerial photograph here, you can see the white arrow is pointing to the location of the Irish Public Records Office, which is located just in the forecourts complex to the rear. And in the image, the map on the right-hand side, you can see it highlighted in red there. This was a purpose-built building, built specifically to house the records of the British administration over the years. And it was available to the public and for those doing research, land registry records. You can see here the building at the front on the left-hand side. This is the reading room where public access was allowed. This was then separated from the record treasury, which actually housed the records. And you can see here the space, the firewall, which was constructed between the two sections of the building to afford the protection of those very valuable records. The interior of the building itself was roof lit and it was split over 5 levels, as you can see in the image here. Purpose-built racking, steel framed interior to allow some fire protection, and readily laid out, stacked, and a very active functioning building, which was full of life and activity as the records were being called down for viewing. What they weren't prepared for was the occupation of the forecourts complex on the 28th of June by rebel forces, anti-treaty rebel forces. And the National Army, the decision was taken to get the rebels to vacate the premises. They thought that this would be a fairly relatively easy operation, but it turned into a 3-day campaign. The nascent Irish army didn't have its own artillery. The British army, who were still in the Phoenix Park, they hadn't left at this stage, gave a loan of heavy 18-pounder artillery to the National Army to commence the bombardment of the forecourt building, which they did. And this, as it took place over a period of 3 days, and the damage was significant. It became a bit of an event. The citizens of Dublin would go to the quays and congregate on O'Connell Bridge and distance from the forecourts to watch the events as they unfolded. Now, just going back to exactly what happened, the shelling, as it took place on the 28th, the rebel occupiers had located themselves in the headquarters block, which was to the rear of the forecourt itself, and they used this building for the storage of their munitions. They were aware of the importance of the record treasury building and the public records stored there. Letters had been sent to them, bringing the importance of the building to their attention, and there's no doubt that they were aware of that. Although not being used for the storage of munitions, there is some evidence to suggest that the record house was being used as a location for the manufacture of mines and bombs. The bombardment continued, and this led to a fire in the headquarter block, which ultimately caused the ignition of the munitions store. The enormous explosion which followed completely destroyed the western end of the building, along with the records that were stored there. This created a mushroom cloud over the city, and the records which were stored in the headquarters block, these were more live day-to-day records which were in use in the forecourts, ended up being blown sky high into above the city, and eventually came down to earth like confetti for a number of hours afterwards. And this image here, you can see the citizens gathering the various legal documents as they landed. This photograph here taken outside O'Connell Street, so you can imagine the scale of the explosion which took place here. This is the result of that explosion of the munitions dump, and what you see there is the remains of the headquarters building, and behind that you can see the public records office, the record treasury, which at this stage has gone on fire, and you can see the twisted, mangled wreckage of the steel framed interior, the roof gone, the building practically completely destroyed. Shortly after, this is poor Herbert Woods, the deputy keeper of records in the public records office, surveying the damage, and very sad time for him. Fortunately, Herbert had actually drawn up a very detailed index of the records which were stored in the building, and this record is available today and is actually being used in the Beyond 2022 project, which I'll discuss a bit later. Again, an aerial shot. This is the reconstruction after the event, which took place many years later. You can see the remains of the four walls of the treasury, record treasury building there, and the construction of an office block, which ended up being built afterwards. This book, The Battle of the Forecourts by Michael Feuer, is highly recommended. It goes into great detail on the events leading up to, and details exactly what happened on those fateful 3 days, what survived, and the aftermath. So specifically getting back to census records which were lost and which have survived. The census records which were actually stored in the Public Records Office in 1922 were the 1821 1831, 1841, and 1851 census records for the entire country. I've asterisked 1821 and 1841 because we're fortunate that for County Cavan, some fragments have, and significant fragments, in particular for 1821 census, have remained. The 1861 to 1891 census returns were not lost in the fire. They were actually destroyed by government order before 1919, partly for the need for paper during the war years and on the grounds of confidentiality. So they had never made it to the Public Records Office as such and weren't lost. They had already been officially destroyed. And we were again looking at the 1901 and 1911 census returns had not yet made it to the Public Record Office by 1922. So they have survived also. The good news is a government-sponsored project called Beyond 2022 has been working for the last number of years to digitally recreate the records which were stored in the Public Record Office. A lot of the records had been copied over the years, had been stored off-site, not only around Ireland, but as far afield as the UK and beyond. So these records have been recovered, have been digitized, and a three-dimensional representation of the building has been recreated. And I believe this will be available sometime later in the year for public access. So that's something to keep an eye out for. So just in general, the surviving, some specific important surviving 19th century records for genealogical purpose, I'll just do a quick run through on here. And these are records which had not been deposited in the Public Record Office. The 6 significant sets of records. As I said earlier, the 1901, 1911 census returns for the entire country have survived. All of the Ordnance Survey mapping and descriptive surveys restored in the Phoenix Park, they survive to this day. The valuation records, Griffith's valuation, local taxation records have survived. The General Register Office, births, marriages and deaths civil records have also survived. The Irish Land Commission records, and the Irish Land Commission temporarily held the tithe allotment books, which are a very important set of census substitute records for the entire country, and the Cavan records have survived there also. And again, the Land Registry, which was established in 1892, along with the Registry of Deeds, now in the King's Inns, records are available. Okay, so moving on, we'll go to the next section of the presentation. Just going to run through the records which are now on Cavan townlands. The earliest 19th century records which we have are the 1821 census records of Cavan, and we're very fortunate here that 17 of the 36 parishes of Cavan have survived, and there's 80,000 individuals recorded here. The tithe allotment books from circa 1832 cover 35 of the 36 parishes, and with 30,000 individuals recorded here. And then moving on to 1841, the only surviving parish from the 1841 census, I believe possibly for the entire country, and again we're highly fortunate here, it relates to the parish of Killishandra, and here we have 15,000 individual records. We then have the Griffith's valuation of 1856 for the entire county as well. So it's a fairly comprehensive coverage of that period. I've also included 1901 and 1911, which we've only just recently put onto the website, but that brings the total number of records now, individual records, to 350,000, which are available to search. Just in detail, going back to 1821, Philip O'Connell, back in 1942 in the Schools and Scholars of Breffni, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to the section on the 1821 census. And what he said was, and I'll just read it out here, in this respect, the County of Cavan has been more fortunate since copies of the returns for at least 16 parishes have been preserved. These copies had been made by the direction of the Cavan Grand Jury and remained in the courthouse of Cavan, where the present writer, accompanied by the late Reverend Joseph P. Meehan Killishandra, collected and examined them. Shortly afterwards, the copies were transferred to the reconstructed Public Record Office in Dublin. And I've been in touch with the National Archives in the meantime, and they've confirmed that the returns were received by themselves in November of 1928, possibly dropped in by Philip O'Connell himself. He goes on to say, in relation to the records, that they were made by order of the Cavan Grand Jury, presumably for election purposes, and that it was evident from the copies that all of the parishes in Cavan were prepared at the same time, which presents the possibility that a full set of 1821 Cavan records do exist and may yet turn up. So exhaustive inquiries were made to trace the missing parish, but nothing found at that stage. And as we're saying, it's probable that they may be in private collections. And so look, we'll just have to keep an eye out for those records, and hopefully they do turn up. In looking through the records, and the map here on the right just gives you a visual representation of the parishes which were covered: Alacalif, Ballymacue, Castleran, Castleterra, Crosserlough, Drumlumman, Drum, Kilbride, Kilmore, Canoley, Larralavie, Loughlin, Lurgan, Mulla, and Muntraconnock are available. We have gone through the National Archives online records. As we're saying, 80,000 individuals are listed here. It is unique, really, for that era. Nothing else like it exists to the level of detail that exists. We identified errors with the transcription and the indexation to these records. The background to the records is that they were photographed by the Mormons back around the 1940s and transcribed in the States, but obviously there was a lack of local knowledge, lack of spellings, townland nomenclature, and many of the townlands have been misindexed. Many of the records have been misfiled and miscategorized, and there have been duplications. In fact, what we find on the National Archives website is that if you're searching the Cavan collection of 1821, you'll be presented with 160,000 records. What apparently happened here is that there were two sets of photographs of the records taken by the Mormons, and both sets were sent back to Salt Lake City, and both sets were transcribed. And for some reason, both sets of records were returned to Dublin and were used to form the basis of the online connection, which is now online. A little bit of an oversight there, and it can be confusing when you're looking at the National Archives, but I say we've rectified that on Cavan Townlands. And also you can search by filter. Catherine will go through in more detail how that can be done, but it means you can pin down records using occupation, date, name, etc., in a much more streamlined and clearer way than currently available. Now, we just have to point out here that the surnames are presented as they were transcribed. There's 80,000 records here, and time just didn't allow us to go through those individual records, but at least we can bring you to the townland. And what we're suggesting is that when you find the record that you believe to be your correct record, it is then best to consult the actual images, which again, we will have available and are available on the website. So that there is that little bit of further checking required, but at least you will be able to get to the individual record, because I think on a top of the head calculation, if you're searching purely by townland, about 75% of the townlands in County Cavan would be concealed due to the misindexation and misspelling of the records. This is just a typical result page for 1821 presented. So up at the top here, you can see by putting in Brady, Peter Brady, all the Peter Bradys are presented, and you will have the townland names, the parish names, and you can then further check the record from that location. There has been a lot of work over the years in relation to the 1821 census, and we've trawled through many of those records, and thanks to Breffni Historical Society and the authors that are still with us, we've been able to transcribe those articles, and they're also presented on the website. We have the Notes and Lavy by the Reverend T. Cunningham, which appeared in Breffni in 1960. Notes on Drumlummon by John Wilson, Breffni 1963. Notes on Munterconnell by Declan Cooney, Breffni 1998. Lurgan, an edited transcription by James Brady of 2008. And Ballyhaise, Glimpse of a Plantation Town in 1821 by Stephen Morrison, which are all very useful and provide further background and detail on that census. And if you're fortunate enough to be looking for records in any of those 5 parishes, you have that additional information to hand as well. Moving on to the tithe allotment books, again, a very comprehensive set of records, giving the landholders, the leaseholder's name in this instance. They won't give the full family details as the 1821 census records do, but at least you will get a surname, and the majority of the parish is covered. And again, just an article from 1941 by R.C. Symington. He's just explained that amongst the records and documents transferred to the custody of the Irish Land Commission from the Commissioners of Church Temporalities by virtue of the Irish Church Act Amendment, the tithe allotment books ranging from 1823 to 837, numbering 2,500 MS volumes. So there were 2,500 volumes covering the entire country, which were taken into the custody of the Irish Land Commission, and these are now with the National Archives, and again have gone through a similar process with photographing and indexation by the Mormons, and the same pitfalls occur in that instance as well. As we're saying, the National Archives received the books in 1944, and they hold the original books for the 26 counties. The Public Records Office of Northern Ireland hold the records for the 6 counties of the North. The tab records exist for 35 of the 36 parishes. They were microfilmed and transcribed in 1949, and I understand that this was the first collection, census collection, which was copied by the Mormons, and these are the flawed records which are available on the National Archives website. I did go into quite a considerable amount of detail in an article which I did for Breffni last year, but I'll just give you a summary here of the findings from that article. Now, on the right here, you can see the list of parishes which were transcribed. In blue, I've highlighted the parishes which were incorrectly indexed, and you can see it's quite a large proportion of the parishes. And just on the second column here, you'll see that incorrectly, for instance, Baileyborough was indexed under County Meath, Drumgoon, County Down, Drumreilly, Leitrim, and going down to the list, you can see that Loughlin, Castlecairn ended up being indexed in Castlecairn in County Cork. So it's just that basic lack of knowledge of local townland names and geography resulting in the records being misclassified. That is still the case on the National Archives website, but we've gone through all these records, we've reclassified them. So now when you go onto Cavan Townlands, at least the indexation will bring you to the correct record. As I think there's no standardized or approved townland spelling at the time of recording information. So the key really to resolving a lot of the errors was to re-index the townlands to the current Log Annam townland names, and that's the approved list of townland names for the country. There were some townland duplications here as well, which is interesting. I wasn't expecting to find it, but some townlands, the records relate to maybe 4 years or 5 years of records as opposed to 1 year. The vast majority, we were just reading 1 year's records, but where you have a townland that's been recorded 4 times, you do get some changes in names, and it's just something to keep an eye out for and to watch out for the duplications that occur there as well. I mentioned the poor indexation and the inconsistent transcription, the lack of local knowledge. And again, I would reckon that 75% of the records, in this case on the National Archives, would have been concealed. But again, there are 30,000 names in this data set. We haven't individually gone through them, but you will be brought to the record. And again, we're suggesting that you go to the Mormon website, the site, to see those individual images and to double check. 132 of the townlands were unmatched. This is where you have an instance maybe where a townland no longer exists, or it might have been a sub-denomination of an existing townland. And as I say, we've matched the townlands that we've identified to the correct Log Annam ID. Here's just an instance. The townland of Snackhill was incorrectly indexed as Inakhil. So if you were typing in, looking for a townland, and you were typing in SNAK, you're not going to find that because it was actually spelled INACK. So that's just kind of a typical error that we've identified in the records. Here's the Mormon Family Search website. It's free. You do have to subscribe to get access to it, but you will be presented with the full set of photographs of the records. And that's just a sample there on the screen of what's available. Indexes are provided. That's a particularly clear one there. And the individual records per townland is available in manuscript form there as well. Moving on then to the 1841 census records, which exist for the parish of Killishandra. This is a screenshot of what we've presented on Cavan Townlands. Quite a considerable amount of information per record. Entire families are listed in this case, giving everything from names, age, sex, religion, status, occupation, education, and native place. And we have created filters here, so you can search by name, you can search by status, native place, or as we've shown here, in occupation, we've entered constable, and you'll see that all of the entries for individuals who are constables, sub-constables, head constables will appear in one place. So if you're doing research in a particular area, this is a way to get to that information in a very accurate and rapid manner. An interesting article by Gerard Albo from 1976 on the parish of Killishandra 1841 census, which is available, and thanks to Gerard for allowing us to reproduce that article on the website. Again, Griffith's valuation, you'll all be familiar with it. We have a stripped down version of Griffith's valuation for the entire county, just indicating tenant names. But again, from a genealogical point of view, it will bring you to the record you're looking for. So I'll just give you a brief overview of other content which you have available on the website before I finish up with this section. That's a screenshot, the homepage. You can see we've got access immediately to civil records. We've got an extensive selection of maps of the county, and we have a library, an index of relevant books to County Cavan. And in many instances here, it's worth checking out. We have managed to get digital copies of some of the books available. So you can actually go in and read the books on the website. You've then got the search map below that, so you can search by parish, townland, latest news section, and basically a list of updates as to what's going on. As the information becomes available, you'll see it on the homepage. The intention really with the website is to provide a homepage for each townland, and you can navigate by map or text to that particular townland. We've also got the individual search by name, which is a facility which we've just updated in the last week or two, which gives a very powerful and fast access to the 350,000 records which we now have available on the site. You can search by topic. If there's an article written about a particular area, you can go into the search box and it will bring you to any relevant articles on that topic. And townlands results will be listed by townland, town, parish, or entire county. So you can search by town. We have recently uploaded a new section on the towns of Cavan and giving specific information relative to towns, populations, maps, etc. As I said, it's featured articles and news updates. We've some unique records on Cavan townlands as well, unavailable elsewhere. We have an analysis of the bodily map of Tuliunco in 1609. This was one of the original plantation maps, which was prepared for the confiscated counties in Northern Ireland. Again, the entire of Cavan was mapped. The article we have here covers the barony of Tuliunco, and there are 137 townlands which we've identified here and linked to the current townland. So you can trace back as far as 1609 in this instance. We've got a complete listing and mapping of the 1652 Commonwealth Survey of Cavan, which covers the entire county, and there's 1,500 townlands, and the owners of those townlands are listed here. And these are lands that would have been granted to the Cromwellian soldiers and adventurers after the infamous visitation of Mr. Cromwell. The 1821 census, as I mentioned, that corrected, that's unique to the website. Again, title problems, as I mentioned previously. And we have the name books of 1836, and the townlands of 9 parishes are listed here. And thanks to Anna Sexton for providing those articles which appeared in the Heart of Breffni over the years. So that completes section 2, and I will now pass you over to Catherine, who will take you on a live look at the search facility.
Thanks, Michael. For the next part of the presentation, I'd like to take you through our Townlands page, where we've recently added 2 new data sets for the 1901 and 1911 census. So for the purpose of this demonstration, we are interested in the townland of Farranseer, which is in the parish of Killishandra. I could find the townland through the map if I knew where it was, or if I didn't know the name but knew where it was. But for the purpose of this, I do know the name, so I'm going to start typing it into our main search box. As I type, you can see the data is being filtered, and by the time I've typed in FARR, we find that Farranseer in Killishandra is available, and we'll click on that. Now we are brought to the townland page for Farranseer. So we can see that the townland itself is in the center of the map, and it is highlighted in bold. If I zoom out a little, you get a bit more context. This is in green is the parish of Killishandra, but it borders the parish of Kilmore. If I click on this grey area, it will display all the townlands within Kilmore. I'll just shut that down, and I will zoom in again. So we can see, for example, that the townland of Farranseer is bordered by Drumcon, Cornafane and Cloggy in the parish of Killishandra, and by Drumcrow, Clonluscan and Anna in the parish of Kilmore. It's nice to have a geographical context for the townland, because if you're searching for records, you may find them in a neighbouring townland instead of in the one you expect. So what else do we show on this page? We have a number of data sets that have been made available, and you can jump to a data set directly using the contents menu here, but I will actually just scroll down slowly and show you what's available. So the first record we have is the plantation maps of 1609, the Bodley maps. And Farranseer was included in the mapping of Tullyhunco, the barony of Tullyhunco. So we have managed to match ancient townland names with modern townland names, and hence the old map here, where we have Farranseer, CK14 is what we have called it for reference, and the modern map, we have Farranseer here. Okay, and the owner was Sir Alexander Hamilton. And then we move on to the Commonwealth Survey of 1652, where the owner was Sir Francis Hamilton, son, I assume, of Sir Alexander. And if I enlarge this map here, you will see that Sir Francis Hamilton, his townlands are highlighted in green, and that he owned most of the east side of Killishandra, and Farranseer is here. Continuing on in chronological order, we have the tithe allotment books of 1824 to 1834. And I can filter on a surname if I know who I'm looking for, and I'm interested in looking for the Saunderson family. As our friend Billy Saunderson, his ancestors come from Farranseer. So if I start typing in SA, we can see that there is a Sanderson in, James Sanderson in the tithe allotment books. There are no name books for 1836, but continuing on, we have the Killishandra Census of 1841, one of the only parishes in the country whose census survived from that time. So again, I'm going to look for Saunderson. So I start to type in an SA in the surname filter, and we can see that there were 4 Saundersons, and they were all part of the same household. And we can find out their names, ages, what they did, etc., all in one place. The next set of records is the Griffiths valuation of 1857. And again, if I type in SA, we can find that there are 2 Saundersons, a William and a James. Now we're moving on to the new data sets that we have recently made available, the first being the census of 1901. And I will look for Saunderson again, SA, and we can see that there are 8 entries. They're split over 2 households, house number 13 and house number 16. If I click on the image icon to the left, we will see the original image from the National Archives site, and there are the 6 entries there, so you can check whether the transcription was correct. But we can shut that down for the moment. And we'll continue on to the census of 1911. And again, we can search for Saunderson, SA, and we see that there are 12 entries. Now the default is to display 10 on a page, but we can display more. So I'm going to up that a little so I can get all of the Saundersons on one page. And now we can see that there were actually 2 households with Saundersons. 10 people in the first household, number 7, and 2 people in the second. So this is where we can see all the records in one place by townland, but we can also get other information on the townland if there are any articles relevant to that townland, we will post them on this page. And Billy has written an article about the townland itself, and we can click on the link here and it will display that for us in a nice visual format. If we click on the link, it's like a book, and it's very interesting, and you can read through that book. So I will go back. So really, that's everything about a townland. We've tried to gather it all together in one place. But again, you can go back to the map and you can click on the next townland and go in and do the same for that. So you can search around a general area if that's what you want to do. So thanks very much. I'll move on to the next part of the presentation in a moment. I'd now like to show you our civil records search function. This is where you can search for a name across all of the civil records that we have available to us. So from the home page, if you hover over the civil records menu item, you will see that we have the different pages for the different types of civil records. We've got 4 census sets, and we have the tithe allotment books and Griffith's valuation. So I'm going to select this function to search all civil records. Now, from here, we can search by surname, forename, year of birth, give or take, up to 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. We can search on the parish or townland if we know it from a drop-down list. And we can search all of the data sets or a combination of any of them. So you will notice here that we have actually available to us nearly 350,000 records to search. Now, I'm not going to be able to press this button now because that's far too many records to retrieve from the server. So I need to narrow down my search a bit more. And really what I want to do is search by surname. So the important thing about this is that we have introduced wildcards that will make the search a little bit easier. For example, if you are looking for the name Riley, which is quite a popular name in County Cavan, you will find on the National Archives site that Riley is spelt in many different ways, sometimes with an R-I-E or an R-E-I, sometimes with 2 L's, sometimes with only 1 L. So I'm going to use wildcards to help me find all the different possible spellings that there are. So I know, for example, that Riley starts with an R, but is the next character, the next characters are vowels, but in what order? So I'm just going to put an asterisk there. And then it's followed by an L, and there may be 1 or 2 L's. So I'm going to put another asterisk and then a Y. So it starts with an R, ends with a Y, and there's an L somewhere in the middle. And we can now see that the number of records has reduced to 22,036. That's still too many to retrieve from the server. We want to get that number below 1,000 before we can actually submit our search. So I'm looking for a Thomas Riley, but again, Thomas could be spelled with a T-H-O or just a T-O. So I'm going to go T asterisk, which is my wildcard, O, and I don't care what it ends with. And if I move on to year of birth, well, we notice now that the number of records has reduced to 961 and the button has turned a dark blue. So I could click it and retrieve 961 records. But let's take a look at the year of birth. I'm going to say, I know he was probably born somewhere between 1845 and 1855. So I'm going to enter 1850 and then give or take 5 years. And now we will see that the number of records is reduced again to 49. So I'm going to click on that now. That's probably a small enough number. So those 49 records are now displayed in the grid here. And I can further filter on any of the columns within this grid. Now, if I want to know where the person lived. I can click on the townland, and the townland will light up as a red dot on the map. So I can move around and see where all these people lived. And that may give you some context that can be helpful. But the other thing I notice here is that within the surname, the very first surname is actually R-I-L-L-Y. Perhaps that's the one I'm looking for. And that might have been hard to find on the National Archive website because there's no E there. And who would suspect that it would be spelled R-I-L-L-Y? So I'm going to have a look at the household here. And we can see all the members who lived in the same household. And then if I look at the image, I'm brought to the original image from the National Archives. And actually we can see that the handwriting is excellent. And it's quite clear that they are R-E-I-L-L-Ys. So there was definitely a transcription error there, which may have caused problems for people trying to search for this family on the National Archive website. But using our wildcard, we have found it quite easily here. Thank you very much for listening. I'd like to hand you back to Michael now.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I'd just like to wrap up proceedings by saying a special hello and thanks to a couple of people here who appear in the photograph. You've got Billy Saunderson there on the left, who many of you will know. Billy not only is a neighbour of mine in Killiney here, but Billy's ancestral homeland, Farranseer, is also adjoining my ancestral homeland in County Cavan, which is Cloggy in Killishandra. And Billy has contributed a lot of research to the website, and we're very thankful to Billy for that, and also for introducing us to his family and friends. And you'll see also in the photograph there next on the right is Willie Digan, and beside Willie are George and Lorraine Cartwright, who arranged a very memorable trip to Clockouter on the Erne last year, and thanks very much for that. And just given the day that's in it, today, as it turns out, is Census Day 2022, and tonight I will be filling out the census form. And as you might be aware, there is a time capsule section at the back of the census, and I will be mentioning this presentation in the time capsule, and hopefully in 100 years' time, somebody might pick up on that and might come across this recording. This is a 100-year-old recording, which I hope is still knocking around in some form or other, and maybe of some interest to people who are doing research in 21, 22. So hello to everybody in the future, and thank you all very much for watching. And on that note, I'll say goodbye and thanks.